A storm lashes the Welsh coast, waves crashing against black cliffs where a fortress stands against the night. Inside its stone halls, a king paces, torches throwing his shadow against walls where prophecies are whispered. His counselors offer only silence, for the kingdom faces an enemy no army can defeat, a curse that withers crops and brings plague. Only one man can see the pattern in the chaos, the thread of fate woven through disaster. He sits apart, eyes closed, seeing not the room but the turning wheel of stars above and the dark currents below. This is Merlin, the figure who steps from the mist of forgotten histories into legend. More than a wizard, he is the architect of a nation's destiny, a prophet born of impossible origins. Today we journey beyond the fairy tales to uncover the man of earth and spirit, the historical echoes behind the mage, and the tragic wisdom that built a myth lasting 1,500 years. The earliest records contradict later romantic versions entirely. Before the crystal cave and the sword in the stone, there was Myrddin Wyllt Merlin the Wild. Our journey begins not in Camelot's golden age, but in the brutal 6th century, in the poems and fragments preserved in the Welsh language. The Black Book of Carmarthen, compiled around the 13th century but containing material centuries older, presents a figure shattered by war. He is a bard, driven mad by witnessing the slaughter at the Battle of Arthuried in 573 CE, who flees into the Caledonian forest to live among beasts. He prophesies from the wilderness, his sanity fractured, his poetry filled with lament for a broken world. This is the primordial core, a man touched by the divine through trauma, a seer whose power is born of suffering, not spellbooks. Archaeological evidence from post-Roman Britain reveals the historical context that birthed this legend. The period following Rome's withdrawal in 410 CE was one of catastrophic collapse and fierce struggle. Tribal kingdoms like Gwynedd, Powys, and Dumnonia fought for dominance against Saxon incursions. Into this vacuum of power and identity stepped figures who provided meaning, druids, bards, and holy men who could interpret omens and recall tribal history. The historical Merlin likely belonged to this class of learned individuals, the intellectual heirs to pre-Roman druidic traditions operating in a newly Christianized landscape. His prophecies, as recorded, often dealt with the political fate of these British kingdoms, offering hope of a resurgence against the Saxons. Then comes the Great Transformation, the moment a Welsh wildman becomes a European superstar. The architect of this change was Geoffrey of Monmouth, a cleric of possibly Breton origin writing in Oxford around 1136 CE. His work, the Historia Regum Britannia, History of the Kings of Britannies, a masterpiece of creative history. Geoffrey needed a compelling prophet to legitimize his pseudo-historical narrative of British kings from Brutus to Arthur. He found Myrddin and fundamentally reinvented him. Geoffrey Latinized the name to Merlinus, possibly avoiding the unfortunate association with the French word merde. More crucially, he detached Merlin from the 6th century battlefield and placed him generations earlier into the time of Vortigern and Ambrosius Aurelianus. This Merlin is no mad forest dweller, but a confident, politically active master of secrets. Geoffrey then gave Merlin an origin story that would define the character forever. In a separate work, the Vita Merlini, but more famously in the Historia, he presents the story of Merlin's conception. A king's advisor reveals that a fortress tower keeps collapsing because 2 dragons on red, 1 white, are fighting in a pool beneath it. To interpret this omen, they seek a fatherless boy. They find Merlin, whose mother is a virtuous princess, but whose father, she claims, was an incubus, a supernatural spirit. This detail, scholars note, is profoundly syncretic, meaning it blends different religious traditions. In Christian demonology, an incubus was a demon who seduced women. Yet Geoffrey presents this demonic paternity not as a curse, but as the source of Merlin's prophetic power. It bridges the human and the supernatural, explaining his abilities while maintaining a veneer of Christian cosmology. The earliest records thus show not one Merlin, but two competing traditions violently fused by a 12th century author with an agenda. Let us enter the first major narrative episode, the foundational myth that establishes Merlin's public role. The scene is Dinas Emrys, a hill fort in Wales, shrouded in mist and desperation. King Vortigern, the controversial ruler who invited Saxon mercenaries to Britain, faces rebellion. He orders his masons to build a mighty tower on this strategic hill. Each day they build. Each night the earth shakes and the stones tumble down. The king's wise men, a mix of druidic remnants and Christian clerics, are consulted. Their solution is chilling. They proclaim the foundation must be mortared with the blood of a fatherless child. Soldiers scour the land and return with a boy named Merlin, son of a royal nun. The boy is brought before the furious king, a sacrifice to be made for stability. This is where everything changes. The child Merlin, rather than trembling, looks at the learned men with unsettling calm. He speaks, and his voice carries not a child's pitch, but the weight of ages. "Your wise men are fools," he declares. He then reveals the true cause of the collapse. "Command the ground be dug," he says. Beneath the foundation, the laborers find a vast pool of water. "Drain it," he instructs. At the bottom of the muddy pool, they uncover two hollow stones. From within these stones emerge two colossal serpents, one white, one red. The creatures coil, then lunge at each other, entwining in a furious, silent battle. The white serpent gains the upper hand initially, but the red one rallies and finally drives the white one away. The court watches, mesmerized by the living omen. Merlin then interprets the vision, his prophecy structured in the poetic style of Welsh, Awen divine inspiration. The pool, he says, represents the kingdom. The two dragons are two peoples. The white dragon symbolizes the Saxons, the red the Britons. The Britons will be oppressed, their towers, their fortresses and realms will fall. But in the end, the red dragon will prevail. He goes further, prophesying the coming of Aurelius Ambrosius and Uther Pendragon, who will temporarily restore British fortune. This episode, as rendered by Geoffrey of Monmouth, serves multiple purposes. It establishes Merlin's preternatural knowledge, his ability to see what is hidden. It politically legitimizes the British resistance to Saxon rule by framing it as a divinely ordained struggle. Most importantly, it transforms Merlin from a potential victim into the kingdom's indispensable guide. Vortigern, stunned, spares the boy. Merlin's life is saved, and his legendary career begins. The scholarly analysis of this episode reveals its deep layers. The two dragons are not Geoffrey's invention. They echo the prophetic poem, Siphoesi Myrddin a Gwendid e Chwer, the conversation of Merlin and his sister Gwendid, where dragons fighting in a lake foretell war. Geoffrey skillfully repurposed this native Welsh motif, grafting it onto a pseudo-historical narrative about foundational British kingship. The fatherless child trope also has ancient roots, appearing in myths from Moses to Sargon, marking the hero as set apart from ordinary lineage. This episode, therefore, is not a whimsical fairy tale, but a carefully constructed piece of political theology. It uses myth to explain historical trauma, the Saxon invasions, and to promise a future redemption, a promise that would later crystallize around the figure of Arthur. Merlin emerges from this trial not as a wizard casting spells, but as a prophet reading the deep truths of the land itself. These overlapping traditions, Wildman poetry, Geoffrey's creative history, and native Celtic symbolism, resist simple categorization. If you're drawn to investigations that trace how legends are built from historical fragments, subscribe for more journeys into the workshop of myth. One question continues to divide scholars. Did Geoffrey invent the Incubus origin to Christianize a pagan prophet, or did he adapt an existing folk tradition about a demon-born sage? The answer shapes how we understand the deliberate construction of one of the world's most enduring archetypes. The consequences of the Vortigern episode echo through every later tradition, directly leading to Merlin's masterwork, the making of a king. Geoffrey's narrative continues with Merlin entering the service of Aurelius Ambrosius, the new High King. Aurelius wishes to erect a monumental stone circle to commemorate British nobles slain by Saxons. He commissions Merlin for the task. What happens next would define the wizard's connection to ancient pre-Christian power. Merlin does not quarry new stone. Instead, he tells the king of a miraculous circle in Ireland, the Giant's Ring, stones brought from Africa by giants. He claims these stones possess healing properties. An expedition is launched, and though soldiers cannot move the stones, Merlin uses his engines and vaguely described devices to dismantle and transport them to Salisbury Plain. There, he re-erects them exactly as they stood. This is Stonehenge. In this audacious move, Geoffrey's Merlin becomes the literal architect of Britain's most mysterious Neolithic monument, claiming its power for the British narrative. But his greatest political manipulation is yet to come. After Aurelius' death, his brother Uther Pendragon assumes the throne. Uther falls desperately in love with Vortigern, the beautiful wife of his ally, Duke Gorlois of Cornwall. At a feast, Uther's obsession is plain, and Gorlois, enraged, leaves the court and fortifies himself in his castle at Tintagel. Uther, burning with lust, begs Merlin for help. The wizard's solution is a masterpiece of morally ambiguous magic. He gives Uther a transformative potion. Uther drinks it, and his body shifts and reforms. He takes on the exact appearance of Gorlois. His companions, Sir Bors and Sir Kay, are also transformed to resemble Gorlois' men. Disguised, Uther rides unchallenged into Tintagel, passes the guards, and enters Egonast' chamber. That night, Arthur is conceived. Meanwhile, the real Gorlois is killed in a skirmish. Uther's deceit is complete. This episode reveals the paradox at the heart of Merlin's nature. He enables an act of profound betrayal, adultery, and deception to bring about a destined king. He serves fate above conventional morality. The means justify the cosmic end. Scholarly interpretations vary wildly. Some see this as a reflection of amoral pre-Christian sovereignty myths, where the king's right is proven by his ability to take what he needs. Others view it as Geoffrey's uncomfortable blending of magical romance with political history, creating an ethical grey zone that later French romancers would try to sanitize. The narrative encodes a brutal truth. Nations are sometimes founded on acts of violation, guided by powers that operate beyond good and evil. Then comes the iconic moment, though not from Geoffrey. The French poet Robert de Boron, writing around the turn of the 13th century, gave the world the image that would become universal. After Uther's death, the kingdom falters. No clear heir is present. On Christmas morning, a miracle appears in a London churchyard, a great stone with an anvil atop it and a sword buried deep in both. Inscribed on it are the words, "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king born of all England." The greatest knights try and fail. The young Arthur, serving as a squire to his brother Kay, needs a sword for a tournament. Having forgotten his brother's sword, he sees the one in the stone and, unaware of the prophecy, draws it out easily. Merlin, present in the crowd, reveals the truth. He produces witnesses to Arthur's royal birth, proving the boy is Uther's secret son. This episode, while added later, completes Merlin's role as the divine midwife of sovereignty. He does not place the sword himself, but he orchestrates the test of worth, validates the outcome, and provides the legal proof. From conception to coronation, Merlin's hand guides every step, shaping a king from lust, deceit, and divine right. Who was Merlin in the daily life of the legend? Beyond the epic manipulations, he served as counselor, teacher, and keeper of secrets. In the Vulgate cycle and later Thomas Malory, Merlin is Arthur's constant advisor during the early years of his reign. He establishes the Round Table, not as a piece of furniture, but as a political institution meant to prevent quarrels over precedence. He guides Arthur in law-giving and diplomacy. His role is that of a sensei or a grey eminence, the power behind the throne who educates the young king in the arts of just rule. This pedagogical function is crucial. Merlin's wisdom is not merely prophetic, it is practical, strategic, and deeply psychological. He understands human nature, both its nobility and its frailties, perhaps a legacy of his own half-human, half-demon composition. His powers and abilities are a fascinating fusion of traditions. He is rarely shown performing flashy Harry Potter-style spells. His magic is more subtle and profound. First and foremost, he is a prophet vats in the Roman sense. His foresight is his defining trait, though it is often presented as a burden, a constant stream of knowledge of future tragedies he is powerless to prevent. Second, he is a shapeshifter, as seen in the Uther episode. He can change his own form and that of others, a power linking him to Celtic deities like the Morrigan. Third, he is a master of illusion and psionic influence, what we might call psychological operations. He can cast veils over armies, create phantom sounds and sights, and influence minds. Fourth, he possesses deep geomancy knowledge of the land, its ley lines, and its hidden powers, as shown with Stonehenge. Finally, he is a technomancer of sorts, a builder of enigmatic devices like the Round Table or the Siege Perilous. Archaeological sites and material culture, while not of Merlin himself, reveal the world that imagined him. The proliferation of Merlin's cave locations across Cornwall, Wales, and Scotland attests to his folkloric absorption into the landscape. These sites, often Iron Age hill forts or Neolithic tombs, became associated with his wisdom or imprisonment in later centuries. Iconography evolves dramatically between medieval and Renaissance depictions. Medieval manuscripts show him as a bearded sage, often in scholars' robes, emphasizing his wisdom. Renaissance and Victorian artists, influenced by Romanticism, increasingly portray him with pointed hat and flowing starry cloak, cementing the modern wizard aesthetic. Each symbol carried precise meaning recognizable to audiences of the time. The robe for learning, the staff for authority, the long beard for ancient knowledge. His behavior is a study in tragic duality. He is the all-knowing counselor, yet he is famously tricked and ultimately trapped. He serves the light of Camelot, yet his origins are shadowed. He champions Christian kings, yet his powers stem from a pre-Christian, possibly demonic source. This tension made him endlessly fascinating to medieval writers. He was a safe way to explore pagan wisdom within a Christian framework, a good demon, or a divinely sanctioned natural philosopher. His knowledge was framed not as heresy, but as a unique gift from God, through his unusual lineage, for the protection of Britain. This delicate balancing act allowed Merlin to survive ecclesiastical scrutiny where other magical figures might have been condemned. All stories of power must end, and Merlin's conclusion is his most human and haunting episode. The template is set in the later French romances, particularly the Vulgate Suite de Merlin. Despite his foresight, Merlin falls helplessly in love. The object of his desire is a young woman of many names, Viviane, Nimue, or the Lady of the Lake. She is his student, eager to learn his arts. He teaches her everything, enthralled by her beauty and cunning. She, however, fears his power and his obsessive love. Using the very magic he taught her, she devises a trap. She lures him into a forest glade, often in Brittany, and asks him to show her a marvel. He creates a beautiful, invisible tower of air or leads her to a hidden grotto. Once inside, she utters a spell words he himself gave her that seals the entrance with immovable stone or thorny roses. Merlin, who foresaw this moment, finds he cannot and will not resist. He is entombed alive, yet alive forever, in a state of eternal sleep or suspension, still able to speak prophecies to those who pass by. This narrative serves profound thematic purposes. It is a lesson on the limits of knowledge. Merlin knows everything except how to save himself from his own heart. It explores the transfer of power from the old masculine earth-based magic to a new feminine water-associated mystery, the Lady of the Lake. It also provides an elegant narrative exit. Why doesn't Merlin save Camelot from its eventual fall? Because he is already imprisoned, his guidance withdrawn at the moment it is most needed. The once omnipotent architect becomes a voice in the earth, a memory in the landscape. Mystical and esoteric traditions eagerly preserved and expanded upon this ambiguity. In the Celtic revival and later occult movements, Merlin was reinterpreted not as a trapped wizard, but as one who voluntarily entered the earth to become its guardian spirit, a figure of the genius loci. The location of his tomb became a subject of speculation beneath Marlborough Mound in the Roman ruins of Carmarthen, or most famously, sealed in a crystal cave at Bardsey Island. Alchemists and Rosicrucians saw him as a master of natural philosophy, his magic representing a lost science. Secret societies sometimes claimed lineage from his hidden teachings. Folk practices preserved tales of him sleeping under hills, ready to awaken in Britain's hour of greatest niedermyth that resonated powerfully during the World Wars. Translation between cultures created unexpected theological innovations. The French romancers softened his demonic origin, often omitting it or reframing it as a blessing. In some versions, his birth is the result of a holy maiden and a benevolent incubus sent by God, sanitizing the paradox. The English tradition, from Malory onward, generally accepted the tragic love story, emphasizing the pathos. This esoteric interpretation explains what public texts cannot. Why a figure of such ambiguous origins remained so compelling. He embodied the archetype of the wounded healer, the wise fool, the powerful being laid low by a very human weakness. His imprisonment was not just an ending, but a transformation into a different kind of mythic presence. The survival of this narrative through adaptation and reinterpretation reveals patterns of cultural fascination with wise failure. For ongoing investigations into how tragic flaws define legendary heroes more than their triumphs, consider subscribing. A debate remains unresolved in scholarship. Was Merlin's entrapment a moral punishment for his demonic ancestry and amoral actions, or was it a tragic necessity, the price for using knowledge to manipulate fate? The medieval texts suggest both, and that unresolved tension is precisely what gives the story its enduring, haunting power. The influence of Merlin extends into domains far beyond medieval literature, becoming a versatile archetype in the modern imagination. The Renaissance rediscovery of Arthurian texts, particularly through Malory's printed Le Morte d'Arthur, fundamentally changed his European cultural presence. He became a staple of courtly masques and epic poetry. In the 19th century, the Romantic and Victorian fascination with the Gothic and the medieval led to a major revival. Alfred, Lord Tennyson, in his epic Idylls of the King, 1859 to 1885, presented a more solemn, morally upright Merlin, purging much of the ambiguous magic. This Victorian Merlin reflected the era's values, a wise, bearded patriarch guiding a Christian empire. The 20th and 21st centuries witnessed an explosion of reinterpretations, each reflecting contemporary anxieties and hopes. T.H. White's The Once and Future King, 1958, presented a Merlin living backwards in time, a whimsical, forgetful tutor shaped by Wylldt's pacifist views. This portrayal directly influenced the Disney animated film The Sword in the Stone. In contrast, Mary Stewart's best-selling The Crystal Cave trilogy, 1970-1979, offered a historical, realist take, grounding Merlin's magic in Roman engineering, observation, and political savvy. Here, he is a brilliant, misunderstood scientist. Modern fantasy from Tolkien's Gandalf, inspired by Odin but sharing the wise guide role, to J.K. Rowling's Dumbledore, owes a direct debt to the Merlin archetype, the mentor, with a hidden past, immense power, and a tragic end. Contemporary movements have reclaimed him for purposes the ancients never imagined. In modern pagan and druidry movements, Merlin is often venerated as a patron of environmental wisdom, a symbol of deep connection to the British landscape. His imprisonment is reinterpreted as a voluntary binding with the earth spirit. In psychology, Carl Jung's followers might see him as an archetype of the wise old man and the trickster, representing the integration of conscious knowledge with unconscious instinctual forces. His half-demon nature symbolizes the reconciliation of our shadow selves with our civilized personas. Recent literary and film scholarship has systematically overturned earlier consensus about him as a mere plot device. He's now analyzed as a complex representation of the tension between free will and prophecy, between earthly politics and otherworldly knowledge. His story asks, if you know the future, are you doomed to enable it? Can wisdom exist without compassion? His enduring appeal lies in these unanswerable questions. He is the ultimate advisor who cannot advise himself, the seer blind to his own heart, the builder of kingdoms destined to fall. From a madman in a Welsh forest to a global icon of wisdom and mystery, Merlin's journey mirrors our own perpetual search for guidance in a chaotic world, and our fear that those who guide us are as flawed and fate-bound as we are. Merlin's story is not a linear biography, but a palimpsest parchment written, scraped clean, and written over again across 15 centuries. It begins with the scream of battle madness in a Caledonian forest and ends in the silent, crystalline sleep of eternal prophecy. In between, he shapes stone, destiny, and a king, only to be undone by the very human heart his demonic father supposedly denied him. He is the bridge between a lost pagan world and an emerging Christian one, between history and desire, between absolute knowledge and profound powerlessness. His legacy tells us that true wisdom is not about controlling fate, but about understanding the tragic, beautiful pattern of its weave. He remains the voice in the stone, the whisper in the forest, the question mark at the center of every prophecy. In an age craving certainty, the enduring mystery of Merlin is a reminder that the most powerful magic is the acceptance of the unknown.